to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing. This is Barry Schwank. I'm a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. Do you ever feel like an outsider, maybe like you don't quite fit in? Within the veterinary profession, it's easy for us to keep people at an arm's length, and sometimes it's hard for people to connect with us. And sometimes that leads to some problems. And it would be really nice for us to know how we as a profession could be a little more inviting. And maybe the best way to do that is for us to talk to an outsider who is also an insider. And that's why I have invited Curtis Gibbs. Curtis, hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. I'm glad to be joining you guys.
Well, I appreciate you taking time. I say that you are an insider because you are currently the CVM regional representative for the Western United States. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Going on 6 years with CVM. So.
It seems like only yesterday, doesn't it? Well, I also say that you are an outsider, and this is not meant to be like shock journalism, but are you willing to confess that, sir, that you are not a veterinarian?
I'm willing to confess I'm not a veterinarian, a vet tech, currently enrolled in any program of any kind, practice manager, or none of the above. Correct.
See, you avoided all of those curses, so that's a good thing. I wondered, I was thinking about this, and this is something that I had not realized until I started down this path, but and I don't know whether a lot of our listeners recognize this, and because of your chosen vocation / calling, you cannot admit this because you're sworn to humility at the highest order. You have a master's of divinity. Was it from Fuller? Did I remember that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
Fuller Seminary.
I don't think many folks within our profession even realize that a master's of divinity is actually a 4-year graduate program that comes after a bachelor's degree, whereas many of us did that and walked out with a doctorate. You did that and walked out with a master's. And so that is, it's quite the accomplishment. I don't think many people recognize that a lot of their pastors have that much education. That's kind of a thing, but it's hard because I think that may even be one of the things that creates a little bit of a barrier for a lot of veterinary professionals is education. And yet here you are without a doctorate in veterinary medicine. You are working for the Christian Veterinary Mission. How in the world did that ever happen?
Well, yeah, it's one of those God things. I was nearing the end of my degree, and I went to the satellite campus here in Seattle, which of course is where the CVM home offices were. And my tribe, my denomination was kind of going through a little bit of a split, and I just didn't know where I was going to go once I finished my degree. And so I was really starting to look at what was next while I was working as a college pastor and youth pastor at a local church. But I had done that for 12 years. And so I kind of sensed that season was ending too. And a job was available, and when you're in an area, the reputable ministries. I had known of Christa Ministries, and it was actually my wife, who's now on staff with CVM as well, and marketing and fundraising and long-term missions. She had found the job description, and honestly, Barry, I'd passed over it. I knew the Christian part well, I knew the mission part well, but that V word right in the middle, I just went next. Okay. Like I'm a dog person. My high school yearbook photo, I'm with my bird dog in it. So but I always go to those V people and say, fix this.
That's right.
Yeah. So I passed over it, and she was like, no, go look at the job description. Well, I looked at the job description, and what we as region reps do, we're really the connecting point. We put on retreats. Well, check. I've done that forever. We do student ministry. Well, check. That had been my entire ministry career was mostly with students. and so you began to go down, and it was like, okay. And she kept nudging me, and she said, why don't you at least do the interview? And I talked to another person that said, CVM is the right person for you. Dave Curtis, who had been like me in background and served with CVM, said you should do that. And so I was like, well, I'll at least go meet. Well, I met with Krista and Kit, and there aren't two finer people on the planet, right? And so it was just one step led to another, and decided to join the team.
Well, so shout out to Dave Curtis, who really, as a pastor, really took the reins for CVM as this region rep model was first really being developed in great earnest. There had always been, I think, an effort to do that, but he really put pen to paper and really structured that out. And I don't want to go too far without saying that it appears that you, like I, also married up and married someone smart enough to know.
Yes. No, so go look at it like, okay, like I'll humor you, and then here I am. Like we kind of have this saying, Shannon is always right, because it's pretty true, you know.
Happy wife, happy life. That's the way it goes. So no, but it's pretty interesting how, and again, it's not something that is unheard of. You have this long-standing experience. You're thinking about ministry. You're going through seminary. You have kind of this vision of what that will look like, having been connected to it for a long time. And yes, the Christian part, the mission part, understand that, but it's that little bit in the middle that makes you kind of pause. No pun intended there for all of our dog lovers. But so when you finally talked with Kit and Krista, what was it really during that conversation, if you remember, that really let you know that this was a place where you could thrive?
Well, it was the welcoming atmosphere of it. I'd come around to the job description being like, you know what? Even the students we minister to, they're not going to call me for NAVLE advice. Like, I'm the love on them, and I'll help them with the mental wellness and all that, and point them to the right direction. But that's not the role of the region rep. So that had been broken down for me. But it was really the culture that CVM has created for the outsider, if you will, that took down any barriers I was a little nervous about. And I see this in the way that the culture that CVM has created for our long-term missionaries. Some of them are married veterinarians, but not the majority of them, right? And there's just as much love and focus on finding a role, on supporting mentally, spiritually, physically, the non-vet, and finding a role for them in Uganda or Bolivia or Mongolia or wherever these places go. And that's just been created by the board or the leadership of CVM, the whole culture, and it's there now. And not that we take our eye off the ball, that stuff, culture takes daily maintenance, but I felt it right away. And now, having been in, for 6 years, I see it with others, and I see kind of a sigh of relief when I meet these young couples as students, and maybe they end up going toward the long-term route. It's the non-vet spouse that, like me, sees that V in the middle and says, what can I do? Am I welcome here? And absolutely you are. And it's just been kind of wonderful that was a wonderful experience for me.
My wife had the same hesitancy, and the very first short course, that was back when short course was attached to the CE conference in Kansas City. And we were attending that conference and invited her to come in to some CVM functions. And there was, I don't know if I want to call it fear, but there was at least some hesitation about it. But after that first connection, she felt very much at home. And I think you hit it on the head, and I think part of it, or probably the majority of it, comes from the C in the CVM, right? That there is that the heart of who we are is not founded in that middle letter. It's on that first letter, and that helps kind of bridge the gap. But I still think that there are a lot of folks, and whether there are people listening that are veterinary professionals who are connected to people that are not veterinary professionals, and maybe have some hesitancy even about connecting with an organization like CVM because of that. But even for folks that are in clinical practice, for students that are connecting outside of their veterinary world with other students, there can still be some barriers that get put up. As you've been observing over these last 6 years, being inside these schools, what are some of the things that you have seen that cause those barriers to go up? And then what would be some of the examples or places where you have seen things being torn down and a better relationships being built?
Yeah, well, I think one thing I'd say too, Barry, is I've seen some of those barriers, whether real or imagined. It's probably some degree of both. Intra-veterinary medicine, right? So even those that are in, the practice manager feels like, well, am I welcome? The vet technician feels like, are you guys? I get probably once a conference that I go to. Are you guys here for me too?
Mm-hmm.
As if we're only there for the, and the veterinarian probably trying to connect as well, and just trying to learn their role, which almost inherently feels in a leadership role, right? But it's different people are different levels of comfort with that and handle that differently. So even within veterinary medicine, there are some real and or imagined barriers that that just either take some relational time or take a stature. I think really inside clinics, it's all about culture and setting that culture. I see, our students that graduate and go out, and they might work a place a year, or they might stay a lot longer. And it's not too uncommon. And in fact, I believe even your story and Dan Beek's story, I was listening to that recently. Mm-hmm. There were short tenures at the first spot, right? And it's so much of that is culture and setting that ability to communicate and work back and forth with each other. I watched, say, Dr. Page Wages, Wages and I do real life real impacts in the Caribbean together. And I served North Carolina State for 5 years. Before being the West rep, I was the Northeast rep. And, she just grabs people and brings them along. And there's something about, her neighbor who's a mechanic. You can go on a mission trip. Let's go, and there's something about that lowers people's guard in a way like, okay, like I'm good to go too here. And I think it's just taking that stature with people and being welcoming. They might be a little timid at first. Just know that they might be. That's okay. The non-vet might be a little hesitant to come to a CVF group if everybody else there is a vet student. Yeah, that's okay. Just after a repetition, they'll welcome them in. They'll join.
I think that approachability is paramount, really, for any group. Really, if you are approachable and make yourself available and approachable, it's much easier to connect. But I think you touched a little bit on it when talking about veterinarians in leadership roles. One of the themes that I've seen quite frequently is a lot of veterinarians are struggling with imposter syndrome, and the idea that if I let someone get too close, then they may see that I'm not as perfect as I think I'm supposed to be, and that kind of developing that level of vulnerability is challenging. I mean, that's something you see probably not just in vets, but pastors and youth ministry.
I was just about to say.
Yeah. Well, and it's across the board. How do you combat that though? What is it as you're talking with even students, maybe not about the NAVLE, but you're talking about how to develop quality interpersonal relationships? How do you help them navigate that kind of space?
Well, I think, first of all, that is a challenge, full stop. So it's not going to solve overnight. I mean, that the degree that you have and you and I have on the pastor side, right? To be called a master of divinity is almost just silly. Yes, we've mastered the divine. Like there is no greater lie of and it's not a lie. What else are you supposed to call it? But that's just silly. I mean, I feel I know God so much better, and I love the scholarship that's in depth. If anybody ever was able to even take some classes, even non-degree wise, I'd say do it. I hold the Bible more more strongly, yet also kind of more open-handedly in some ways. And yet I know it's the truth. So anyway, so yeah, that imposter thing is going to come in a lot. Just so know you're not alone. No, it's not even the vet profession. That doesn't make it easier, but I think step one is knowing that. And I think step two, and I don't want to give a trite answer, but some of it is that C in CVM. Like if you can center your identity on Christ, which again isn't overnight, you can even know it here, but it takes a little while to migrate down to your heart and soul. Then you know that you're accepted by the most important one. You know you're sufficient. You know you're okay. And I think being around others in that way, in that fellowship, so you're not isolated. I mean, podcasts, listening to Dan Beek tell his story feels like, in some ways, 25 years into the profession, he's learning what he wants to do when he grows up, we all kind of go through that, right? But no, it's not overnight, but know that I think it is developing that vulnerability. What gets in the way of that is pride. I'm not saying to take pride in, don't take pride in your work. You can be proud of what you've done and what you've accomplished, but learn what humility looks like. It comes through Christ likeness. And I think when we are humble enough to admit the things we don't know, we're in such a better posture to learn and grow, and also in some ways not be an imposter, because we know who we are, we know what we're not, and we know we're on this trajectory of, hey, we're becoming a better veterinarian or better vet technician, a better practice manager. But that's just a daily growth process, and it's okay.
Yeah, and it's part and parcel of just being human. I mean, and we could have, you can remove the word vet tech, vet assistant, veterinarian, and insert any profession into that group, or into that sentence. And the struggle is real, no matter who you are or where you are in life. And it certainly is not an overnight fix, and that's kind of what that progressive part of our walk and our faith journey really is about, is continually growing in him, and growing to be more like him. And that means understanding that we will fail from time to time. We will continue to be broken. And that's okay, because that's when that, it's that cracked vessel where the light shines through kind of a thing. And recognizing that. For veterinarians, I think that there's, there is this desire, I think, inherently, that we are compassionate, and we want to be able to give people all the answers that will help them with all of their problems. And it's also very important for us to realize that we're not God, and we shouldn't be God, for our clients or for the people around us. What are some of the things, as you've watched through your veterinary students and through professionals, what are some of those endearing qualities of within our profession that seem to run pretty consistently through our profession, that should be things that we should celebrate a little bit more and use to build better relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it first, that empathy, that compassion, that desire to care. I think a care for creation. I mean, you love animals, and I have seen some veterinarian, like maybe non-CVMers or such, that you can tell they really kind of in it for the animals, and the people can be a nuisance and a bother. And you and I have never come across any people in pastoral work that have been challenging. I know, right?
Never.
So like challenging people are everywhere, but you have that opportunity to love and do two things at once. Like creation care is a God call, full stop. So you're already doing your best with the animal, and you're not always going to be successful. You're going to lose some animals because you're not God. But if not you, then who? Like, you've really stepped up. People that care in the vet profession for animals have really stepped up the call to do things that a large part of the population can't or isn't doing. And that's beautiful. And we need more of you, by the way. We need more and more out there. I think that's why you're seeing all of a sudden all these new vet schools going up everywhere, which is great news for us to be in student ministry. But it's a response. I think we're lagging behind in making more vet professionals. But then you have the opportunity to love on the person and the human, and do something that they literally can't do for themselves. I we had to say goodbye to our dog of 12 years, had osteosarcoma on his dome there, and our local vet, not CVMer, just who we've been going to, gave us just the best compassionate care. And we watched the dog do actually well and longer. Got to another hunting season, got to take him out on the boat and do a ride. And it was very powerful, like very, and it's something I couldn't do. Like I don't have that, you know, and I meet a lot of vets, so sometimes I recognize people. And it takes me a second for it to click in who they are. And because I've been doing this a while. And I was at the Western Vet Conference in Vegas recently, and I saw this vet, and I was like, "Oh, hey," and I was halfway to greeting her, and then it dawned on me, this is the vet. She's since left this practice here, but this is the vet that cared for our dog during that season about 2 years ago. And I didn't really keep it together. I kind of did, but I mean, it emotional because Dr. Chan, shout out Dr. Allison Chan, wherever you are, provided just the best care my family could have wanted for our little fella right into the end, right? And that was so good. And veterinarians have the ability to provide that for people, even when the time, to say goodbye is. And, I'd say some other things that there's kind of most vets kind of driven. There's some type A-ness there. There's some, inherent leadership, some inherent drive. You're not going to achieve, DVM or VMD for my pin folks out there if you don't have that. However, I will say just a small little shout out. There are those who aren't, and I've seen them. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to the imposter syndrome, and also this kind of group of people that isn't in that realm is know yourself. I think wherever we are, we need to know ourselves. And I share with you one of the staff members that's no longer with CVM, but just as a volunteer now, shared with me their story on getting their degree, and it was a challenge. Mm-hmm. And it was because she did not fit into this type of mold, and needed some extra help with tests. Realized she kind of had a little bit of a learning disability. I've kind of learned about myself. I've got some kind of ADD stuff going on, and I used to think that was just something people used to get out of tests, and it's not. And so, like, here I am, like, I thought it was, fidget spinners were for people in 5th grade, and here I am with one right now, just so I'm not bouncing. So, like, you got to know yourself, and you've got to. And so I think there's a little bit of that helps too. But yeah, that would typify most vet professionals, that they're in that vein. I just want to say there are some that aren't, and that's okay too. Just know how you work with yourself, and I think that helps. The other thing is there's a few vet professionals that are solo, they're out on their own, they're doing farm calls, but most have to work in teams.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, you become, that can be where you might know the vet med world front and back, but it's working in the clinic, it's working with a staff, that becomes the challenge. And so I think that's something vet professionals do well, but almost all of them have to do in some way, shape, or form.
Well, and it's necessary. I think that many of us need to get to this place where we admit that we are stronger together. And when you recognize, I think, who you are and how you were put together and the way that God, knit you together, you are a very specific and unique individual. You don't have to be something that you're not. And yet on your teams, it's okay to let people in to be the things that you're not. It's good to have someone who can be organized if you're not organized. It's good to lean on them and to help them. Even from a vulnerability standpoint, there are people, like I struggle that story with your dog. I struggle with that every single time. And if I don't have someone that I can be real with and not just holding it together, but admit that I'm struggling with life and death and the role that I play in that and having to watch it. It's okay to admit that you struggle with things. It's okay to be vulnerable. And I think that as one of the ways that I think veterinarians oftentimes keep people at arm's length is trying to be something that we're not. And then we isolate to the point where we're suffering and we're struggling because we just haven't allowed people in to fill in those gaps where we're not whole and complete. So has this experience then, I mean, probably we said 15 years ago, if I had asked you, hey, Curtis, as you're going into seminary, is your vision to be emotional and spiritual support for future veterinarians? Was that your calling back then? Or how has that grown for you?
You'd had me through most of that sentence, and then, and again, I've always been a dog person. And we had cats too. So I've always been an animal person. But yeah, this is not just like a lot of us. We might end up somewhere or someplace or something else that we didn't see, but God certainly knows best. And he certainly did for me, like where this fits and what I can add, what we can add to the table by bringing in, some theological elements. That's another thing that's been helpful to find a home, the C part of CVM. I think about what you're mentioning with euthanasia. And so I did a talk at this last CVMC conference in Nashville, and I had prepared kind of like the pamphlet, if you've ever seen one that we have at our booths. It's, do pets go to heaven? It doesn't really provide an answer, but it provides some good scripture. I think it's really decent, good pamphlet. It doesn't just open up and say yes or no. That would be a nice little shocker. But so I kind of just expanded on that at this past Nashville thing and did a talk on just what does scripture say about animals, and pulled in a lot of stuff that I could research from stuff. And I said, well, before we get going, let me ask the crowd here. It's a good crowd, good number of people there at this year's conference. What questions you have, or what do you want to know coming out of this? And the first lady, I'll never forget it, right on the aisle, she raised her hand and she said, well, I'd like to know about euthanasia. And I said, okay, we're gonna kind of cover that. I said, do you have any initial thoughts on that, or like what you want to? And she said, well, I kind of want to know, just like euthanasia and if pets, have an afterlife or not, because something to the effect of if they do, I don't know if I can do another euthanasia. Like this was a real hang up for her. And I get it. Like you said, the part we play in life or death. But to me, and people came around her at the end, I think we kind of covered it. Thank goodness. I really started sweating then because you could tell, and the room went dead silent.
Yeah.
Because this was a big, and this was not a student, this is somebody who'd been in vet med a while. Right. And I know those scars add up over time. I know of people that have left or stopped doing that after years of doing it, but I know people who that's one of their favorite things too. And I think in the end, one of the summations of that is, I just think that's good stewardship.
Right.
That's good creation care. This is something God calls veterinarians to unique spot to do. And if you're uncomfortable doing it, that's okay. Maybe one of your but I'd say consider it in that way, because I believe God has given us that gift. And with our guy, we had Lap of Love come out, and it was just a beautiful gift at the end there. And it was peaceful and it was good. And there was no part of that process that gave me hesitation, And so I just, I think being honest, being transparent, being authentic, letting people see in, and then connecting with other people, don't live in isolation, I think are going to help a lot of the challenges within vet med.
Well, I appreciate that, and I could probably talk with you for another 4 or 5 hours on this topic. I thoroughly, if I haven't said this before, I thoroughly appreciate what you bring to CVM. It is indeed a God-given gift to be able to connect with people, and increasingly, as we're seeing veterinary professionals who are just struggling with not just who they are, but their place in life, and having that deeper connection is so very important. And I think that as we learn how to embrace who God created us to be, as we begin to let some of those walls down, to build greater relationships, provide some more vulnerability to allow other people to speak into our lives and support us, that we can actually fulfill the calling that God has placed on our lives. The more that we grow in that knowledge, the more we grow in that capability, hopefully we're learning how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.